Well, who would have thought, episode 6 of the OWL service, and we're still in lockdown. I don't know about you, but it's beginning to get a bit tiresome now, isn't it? From a business perspective, not least, it's really difficult to plan any kind of business, I guess, when you're not quite sure how long these lockdown conditions are going to last. So I have to admit that I'm feeling less bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as I was in the first 5 episodes. And, you know, I've given up on dress up Friday for the time being. But just to bring a little bit of colour into this session, I've been around the garden and picked some beautiful dandelions. They're weeds, but weeds are just flowers in the wrong place, aren't they? So set dress up Friday rather than me dressing up. I don't want this episode to be maudlin or downcast in any way, though, of course. We are still determined to deliver training, even though the face-to-face element of training has, for the time being, had to take a back seat. Now, I've been bigging up my colleague in the business, Sandy Keating, for several weeks now, and I haven't, until now, managed to persuade her to come onto the webinar to talk about her training in ACM Training. But I did manage to pin her down yesterday afternoon and to ask her some questions, in particular around training for trainers. And clearly things have changed dramatically for trainers with this transition, as I say, from face-to-face to online. And she was telling me that despite the changes, the trainer and the training environment are still really important. So here's what she had to say. I'll be back at the end of what she had to say with a few additional thoughts, and then that will be it from this abbreviated version of the OWL service. But here's Sandy.
I still want to encourage people to really remember the things that make us good trainers, and to ensure that our training, even if it's now delivered in a different way or facilitated in a different way, is still engaging, interesting, effective, and where you leave your trainees wanting to come back for more. I think one of the key considerations is us, the trainer, and also the learning environment. And just because we're not face-to-face, it doesn't mean that we still can't be as effective or as good or as successful as we were when we were in the room with our trainees. So I think you've got to think about, you know, what are the key qualities and traits of good trainers? What do I already possess? And now that we've got a little bit more time, what can I develop? So, for example, empathy's really important. And maybe that's something I could work on. Maybe it's looking at different ways to be engaging. Maybe it's discovering new topics. So there are a whole range of key qualities and traits, and in my the trainer course I cover these. The other thing is the learning environment. And if we're lucky enough, and actually now that we are in charge of our own training room effectively, how do we make it a really interesting and engaging environment? Not just from a physical point of view, but also from a psychological point of view. So again, that's a topic I cover in some detail in my course. If you, like me, train 2 different types of trainees, insofar as I do a lot of in-house work, so I work with individual clients and they've got a group of people from the same organisation. And I also do open courses, so different people from different organisations. And they come with different sort of expectations and needs. Generally in-house, maybe one person has determined what the training need is, whereas when you opt to go to an open course, generally you've identified the training need. So I think it's finding out what the training needs are, if you can. Secondly, we need to give some consideration to learning styles. Now, here's a challenging one, having moved out of the training room into a virtual training room, because not everybody, if you're doing your face-to-face, is going to want the camera on them. So some people might want to take part in your training session, but they want to keep the camera off. So we're assuming that they are very strong with their auditory listening skills. But as most of us know, the majority of people, we're either kinesthetic, we have to do something to learn it, or we're visual. So how do we understand what the best way that our learners, their style of learning? And one of the things that I cover in my course is a survey a very simple survey that we can send to our delegates to get a good idea of what the mix is. But if you don't do that, just make an assumption that most people aren't auditory, or that's not their strength, that we're more visual and hands-on. And then also, what's motivating people, or what would motivate people to come to your virtual training room or to buy your online training package? So what are the things that motivate people to learn? And then probably, maybe more importantly, especially for those of you that are training adults, what are the key characteristics of adult learners? Because they are different to the characteristics of adolescents and children, although I think that we can engage children in a more non-didactic way. But being didactic is not a good way to train adults. So understanding, based on Malcolm Knowles' work many, many years ago, what are the key characteristics of adult learners? One of the kind of barriers that I find with a lot of people who have come to my open course or I've trained in-house is actually challenging ourselves to think about new and different ways of training people, the kinds of activities. And I always ask people, how confident are you running a role play? And of course, most people go, oh, no way. And I think one of the pity about something like role play is it's a great technique for doing something as if it was real life, but in a safe environment, but it's generally not well done. So I think it's, what are all the different activities that we can use? Case study, mind map, consensus exercise. There's lots of different activities. And I think what we've got to do as trainers is, what are the pros? What are the cons? And how long does it take to set up? So I often use debate, which is a great way to engage people. It allows everyone to have a voice. It controls the people that like to take over, but it takes some time to set up. So, analysing the pros and cons of activities. Then, of course, training aids. Some of us sort of just stick to the same old, flip chart, PowerPoint, but we've always got to think, how can we make our session brain friendly, what we call brain friendly? So that's about, would it be appropriate to use some music? What about artwork? We're all told that we're great artists until we get to the age of about 4, and then we're rubbish. Dance. I use about 24 different colours in terms of the pens that I make available on the table. So it's, I use bright coloured paper. I've got lots of Post-it notes. I've got index cards. So it's just about, how do we think about becoming engaging and doing almost all of the things we used to do when we were live in a training room, as opposed to in our new little virtual training room. And I'm sitting down talking to you now, but I would, if you can and have the space, I would encourage you to stand up, to try to be as engaging in that way, and to use yourself as a resource. One of the issues that we often have is, how do we know what people have learned? So that's my biggest argument in favour of having an interactive session, no matter what you're doing, because if you have activities, you can assess as you're going through the session what people have learned, where the gaps are, rather than waiting to the end of the session and doing a test, and then where do you go when you find out some people haven't learned what it is they came to learn. Now, there are some topics, health and safety, various other topics where you probably have to do some kind of formal assessment. But I still think we should challenge ourselves to be as active and interactive as possible. So that's a good way to assess what's been learned. Ending the session is often difficult for people. They sort of get to 5 minutes before the end and they, any questions? But I think we can do a range of things. Set up a peer exercise. If you use something like Zoom, you can put people, pairs into breakout room and give them a couple of topics and challenge them to ask each other what they've learned about that topic. You can encourage the group, if everybody is in agreement, to set up a blog group or a Facebook group, so the learning is ongoing. If you're working with a group from one organisation, and let's hope that work continues to come in for us, you might suggest giving them some virtual index cards and saying, right, what are the 10 key things that you can take away from the session, and let's put them up in our virtual rooms, and when we have our weekly meetings, we can remind ourselves about what the session has taught us. The thing you shouldn't do is go over the time that you said the session was going to end. That's still a cardinal sin. In the same way, if you said you're going to finish at 4 o'clock in real life, when we were face to face, you don't go over the time you've set. And then finally, getting feedback about how you have run the session, facilitated. It doesn't matter. I've been training for over 30 years and there are still things that I need to learn. Sometimes you might get feedback and you think, oh, I'm not sure that that's, fair or legitimate. I mean, hopefully that won't happen very often, but it's always great to keep learning. So I have a qualitative, quantitative online feedback form that I've always used and that I will continue to use.
My colleague Sandy Keating with an explanation of some of the topics that she covers in her Train the Trainer workshop. It's a 3-module workshop. 2 of the modules are hers and 1 is mine. Mine focuses more on the technical competencies that trainers need now in this new online world in order to deliver effective training. We've also started a playlist on the YouTube channel called The Diary of an Online Trainer, where myself, Sandy, and indeed other trainers are very welcome to record a short video diary entry on their experience of online learning. We're all learners to an extent, and not just our trainees in this brave new world of work. And having delivered a couple of online sessions this week, I just want to spend a few moments talking about that experience and what I've learned from that. And I think lesson number 1 is that we need to keep our online sessions, at least initially, really, really simple. There are huge additional burdens on trainers from that technological perspective, and it's quite easy to get lost in those additional responsibilities. And then for the training itself, the whole reason people have signed up to fall to an extent by the wayside. So I think we need to go back to our training plans and to simplify them. We may have been very used to delivering them in a face-to-face scenario, but perhaps they're too complex and need stripping right back to the essential elements so that we have some brain power left to actually do the technological stuff that is a necessary part of the trainer's life. Now, the other thing or the next thing I'd say is that group sizes, of course, Zoom and WebEx and GoToMeetings and Microsoft Teams offer you the facility to have vast audiences potentially. And I'm not knocking big audiences. I'd say they're going to be a little bit more like a performance for the trainer, an illustrated lecture, perhaps, rather than a tutorial where there is interaction. But if the group size is too big, any meaningful interaction is going to be fatally compromised. So I think that, a small group, perhaps even less than 8, I've found that managing more than 12 people is a real struggle. There simply isn't enough space on the screen to keep an eye on everybody. And that rather presupposes that everybody does switch their webcam on, which leads me on to, if you like, etiquette issues. I think this new way of working puts an awful lot of pressure, yes, on trainers, but it also puts additional technical pressure on trainees. And to start with, of course, we're all feeling our way. But I think the norm will have to be that if people want to get the most out of live, interactive online training, well, then they're going to have to switch their webcams on. But of course, that means that you've got to have a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop with a webcam on it, and you've also got to have a pretty good broadband connection. And speaking of broadband, that's the one factor that can cause chaos. In the old days, it used to be, if you like, a power cut at your venue as a face-to-face trainer. It used to be the laptop not speaking to the projector in the training room. Well, now it's a dropout or complete failure of broadband. And I would say to government, I know that they're very busy at the moment dealing with COVID-19, but one of the things that is going to help the country and help business and certainly the training sector emerge from COVID-19 is to make sure that everybody, every single part of Britain has really fast, really good quality broadband. Without it, online training, however jazzy Zoom is and so on, it simply isn't going to work. People are going to get frustrated that they can't hear, they can't see momentarily, or that the whole lesson just disappears in front of their eyes. So broadband has to be a priority for any government emerging from this. Can I say it, shitfest? Because it is a mess, isn't it? And the other thing I think I would add now, before drawing this webinar to a close, is that as trainers, we need to get up to speed, first of all, with one platform. We've chosen, rightly or wrongly, at ACM Training to use Zoom. It strikes us as really user-friendly from a trainer's perspective, but also from a trainee's perspective. We get the security concerns. I have to say, I think to an extent they are slightly overblown, perhaps stirred up a little by Zoom's envious competitors. And in any case, the company has itself recognized these security failures and has got a 90-day plan to try and address those problems. And the latest security update is out, I think, in the next few days. So if you don't get used to one conferencing training platform, I think there's a risk that you might deliver one session via Microsoft Teams, the next via Zoom, the third via WebEx, and as a trainer, you're never going to fully understand, or it's going to take a long time certainly, to fully understand all of the bells and whistles that come attached in slightly different places with slightly different conferencing platforms. And perhaps it's best to start with to specialize in one. Once one is up to speed with that, well, then to reach out to another and another, so that you can offer your training across a broad range of platforms to suit your clients, but you're not putting an additional pressure on yourself to learn all of them. So these are the sorts of things that we as trainers are going to be talking about in bullet point form in our diary of an online trainer. It's here on the ACM Training YouTube channel. It has its own particular playlist, a couple of entries there at the moment, but I'd encourage you to offer your thoughts as online trainers and to either send me the raw video that I can edit or pitch an idea to us at ACM Training. And if we think it's an idea worth sharing, and I'm sure we will, of course, well, then we'll stick it on the diary of an online trainer. We don't want it just to be our musings on this new way of training. So as I said at the start, no dress up Friday this Friday. I just don't feel like it really, but I'm sure some of you do, and some of you have dressed up, and I shall be looking at the hashtag Dress Up Friday after this webinar to see who has shamed me. So until next time, cheerio.